Martin. This is last night. Martin, you're fully confident aTyr is a bust. I don't know where your motivation is. I can about that I'm not the smartest person. You seem sincere, so I'm not sure how to take your message. I know people within the company that I'm sure you don't. What I've seen personally contradicts what you're making these people believe. What do you think you know that I don't? I think he wrote, I can admit that I'm not the smartest person. Okay, I guess I can respond. Let's see. 𝗦𝗛𝗘𝗢 and you will agree. Why is he a millionaire with us? Doesn't he have better things to do? Yes, like make more millions. You do realize this is Martin Shkreli we're talking about, the guy who lied to investors, rerouted company funds to cover it up, and literally went to prison for running a Ponzi scheme. I was actually acquitted of the rerouting thing. He didn't make mistakes. He knew exactly what he was doing. If he sounds convincing now, that just means he's gotten better at it. This guy seems like he really doesn't like me. What's your guys' thoughts on 𝗟𝗩𝗘𝗢, or is Joby a better company? Yikes. This is why you can't outsource your due diligence. Let the data speak. Can't let a felon with an agenda and a history of moving stocks through social media influence your position. You know what's funny is that if somebody has a good track record of shorting stock, biotech stocks, say, I don't know, for their whole life, and they say that they're short a biotech stock, it kind of makes sense that the stock drops. You can't just, nobody can just post, hey, I think the stock is going to drop and drop it. What matters is the person with the track record. The market believes that person. So when the market believes the guy, it's because the market trusts the guy. If you post, nobody believes you. I haven't spent time analyzing either too much. Wow. Because I like one play at the time. Just have noticed the comparisons a lot. I like one play at a time. TLDR. Shrek is short because it is a fairly drug. Everyone else here is long because the way phase 3 is set up, it doesn't have to deliver much. Everyone agrees it's a high risk, high reward. Don't put in more than you fan lose. Overall, nothing new was learned, LMAO. How do you guys usually play as earnings reports are coming for stocks you are invested in? I usually just buy stocks and forget about them, but notice a lot of mine have earning reports coming up in a week or two. I noticed this as well. Does the thesis you invested with still hold? Yeah, do nothing. Nope. Sell and move on. Playing earnings is, in my honest opinion, hardly worth it. Better ways to spend your time. Just FYI, volume's been very low today. There doesn't seem to be much more buyers or sellers of this. Makes sense for both sides to be effectively waiting on results. Could run maybe once they announce database lock or a more precise window for results, but who knows? I'm waiting to see if we can get any updated analyst reports following the Cantor non-deal roadshow. Could you actually outline for the layman why you have this bearish case on video, other than saying it's a fake drug or doesn't work? I read your report and other contrary interpretations of the phase 1 and 2 data. You have omitted the March 2025 paper on the drug mechanism that argues how NP2, set in context, is a new novel technique. I don't see anything wrong with that the company has found a mechanism and then tried to target a disease with it. I think the 1/17 patients data is clearly indicative the drug works. Why else are doctors excited for the drug? You have a successful track record in this field, but you're relying on appeal to authority here. Why has it passed phase 2 trial and been given a phase 3 trial? I'm wondering too. By the way, he sent his first message in this chat today at 9:30 sharp, the very moment the markets opened, just like following some kind of marketing schedule. They're on to me. I gotta switch it up. Hey, almost back at 5. That was a nice little dippy. I think it's a bit too risky with the 300,000 share short put on by Shkreli. Did he post proof? Yes, but one of the lessons that 𝗦𝗏𝗘𝗢𝗏, whoever this guy is, 𝗦𝗏𝗘𝗏, is trying to teach is for every person to do their own due diligence, which is extremely difficult for the average investor when it comes to biotech. You don't say, huh? You might say you understand, but you are just a person on the internet. No one should trust you. I thought the point of this community was to teach us all how to pick stocks, share them with each other, and get more diverse opinion. Waiting aTyr to drop to 4 buckaroos before buying a good chunk. The likelihood of a clean phase 3 readout looks pretty solid on a few key factors. Strong prior data. Trial execution. The trial completed on time. That's a good sign. Clear regulatory strategy. The PE is acceptable and sarcoidosis. Insider confidence. There's heavy insider buying. Recent Canner roadshow. Management just did a non-deal roadshow. Analyst sentiment. No downgrades. Consistent price targets in the $16 to $35 range. This suggests analysts think the data will hit. Taken together, this points to a high chance, 70% of a clean outcome. Primary endpoint met, clear efficacy signal. There's always some risk, but based on the setup and behavior for management, the odds look favorable. Yeah, this is ChatGPT. Rough morning. Am I cooked at 5:30? I'm in at 5:25. I'm right with you. This is why 𝗦𝗏𝗘𝗢𝗏, again, this 𝗦𝗏𝗘𝗏 character, says you should have a margin of safety. Patience is key, young Padawans. Go for a nice walk and enjoy the weather. Shkreli's the GOAT. Hey. I might hire a biotech analyst. I called one of my old coworkers. Yeah, he's a biotech analyst god, yes. That is how I would describe 𝗦𝗏𝗘𝗏𝗏. Apparently he's like institutionalized for insanity or something. Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. And he says that his like mental health problems help him see the stock market more clearly. I mean, you can't make that up. Tell me that's not the coolest thing ever. Bro, I see people. Word? What are they telling you? Buy this stock. Should I buy that stock? And he's made millions. Like, yo, he sees ghosts. They think I'm crazy, but I don't know. My stock account just keeps going up. They're giving me all this medicine. I don't know. I just keep doubling up. That's his story, apparently. That's all cap, right? That's gotta be kappa. I smell cap. If being smart was alpha, every top investor would be, you know, a physicist. Smartest investors don't sound like they're really that, you know, that smart and sophisticated. They're kind of normies. There's some exceptions, mostly normies. Unhinged autism doesn't do you that well. I mean, this is such a crazy note, man. I really want to call this analyst Troy Jensen. I'm sure he's all right. I mean, he's got to do it for banking reasons. Okay. I guess there's a photographer named Troy Jensen, but this is a different guy. Troy Jensen. Whoa. He's been around the block. RBC, Piper for 15 years. Lake Street, Canner. Should I call up and just be like, do you know who I am, bro? Do you know who I am? No, I'm not a client, so I don't want to, you know, if you're not a client, you're not supposed to call, right? He's going to ask me if I'm a client. All I have to do is say, yeah, I'm a huge client. I'm sorry, do you not know who I am? Do you not know how much I pay your firm? Oh, I'm so sorry, sir. Thank you. Anyway. This is Martin Shkreli with Fidelity. Martin Shkreli. How do I know that name? All right, is that the? No, we just have the same name. My cousin. Sir, I have a bank account with JP Morgan. I do have an account. My checking account. I've been a long-standing client of this bank. Martin Shkreli from Citadel. Just say it real fast. Martin Shkreli from Citadel. Make the Citadel sound like really clear. Is Ken Griffin from Citadel? I didn't know you made analyst calls. Yes, I do. I just started. Get AI? I just started. Anyways, let's talk about D-Wave. Jamal from Citadel. What up? Yeah. What up, son?
I guess, could you explain to someone who's relatively unfamiliar with lung pathophysiology, how exactly do you determine that aTyr's lead doesn't work when you compare it to, it was a TNF alpha inhibitor that you compared it to in your paper? I didn't really understand like how you analyzed that.
Well, just on that thing specifically, you know, between the TNF alpha inhibitor and the IL-12 inhibitor that was tried in that trial, there was no efficacy with either of those drugs. And in fact, placebo beat those drugs, which was kind of shocking, numerically at least. And those are between those two drugs, you're covering a huge amount of the autoimmune sort of space. And so I think aTyr management has said that they think their drug works through in some kind of immunotherapeutic perspective, you know, whether, you know, immunology is a big space, but, you know, they think that's how it's quote unquote working. Of course, I don't think it's working at all, but that's their hypothesis, is that it's autoimmune related, that it's doing something in, you know, the immune homeostasis or something like that. And it's really, you know, hard to believe, because if you, one, I mean, the mechanism is kind of out from left field, but two, you know, there had been many trials of autoimmune drugs in sarcoidosis, and they've all failed, including the J&J, those two drugs from J&J, but not just those two drugs, many others as well. Sarcoidosis has been, you know, attacked by pharma many times, and nothing's really worked. Even steroids don't really do that great in their first line therapy. So sarcoid is like not necessarily that autoimmune, and, you know, it's a tough disease to sort of, like I said, there's like been about 20 clinical trial failures for sarcoidosis, and I think that's a bad sign. It certainly doesn't mean that there can't be a first. You know, of course, there's often that does happen, but in the history of medicine, as far as I know it, you know, if you find a disease like Alzheimer's, where there's just been a litany, or pancreatic cancer even, where there's just been a litany of failures, there's nothing to grab onto therapeutically. And, you know, those diseases are often just in sort of tractable. And I feel like going after an intractable disease that's not well understood is often like, you know, hubristic and kind of a motif that works really well for biotech shorting. Like biotech has been a great shorting space for like Alzheimer's, where again, we don't really understand the disease. We have a couple of clues like beta amyloid, but nothing's really worked. And there's been literally 100 phase 3 failures in Alzheimer's and only 2 successes. That's not a great batting average. And again, I'm not too thrilled with this thesis because, you know, it's not that causal. It's not really legitimate from a logical perspective, but it's certainly not a positive thing that nobody's been able to ever crack this disease. I think that, you know, is basically playing the game on hard mode. In rheumatoid arthritis, you know, there's like 20 drugs for rheumatoid arthritis, you know, because we understand that disease somewhat and we know how to kind of tackle it. So I don't think it's positive that, you know, nobody's figured out sarcoidosis. And in fact, the main therapeutic hypothesis has sort of been repudiated by many, many trials. And then I think the bigger part is, how does this drug actually work? Whenever I look at a medicine, I'm really trying to like visualize in my mind's eye the drug entering the bloodstream from the IV, you know, zooming in to micron like level resolution, and asking myself, like, where is this drug going? Where is it going to bind to and why? And what is it doing exactly? And I think 99% of the people involved in aTyr stock, long or short, can't even answer that question. And, it's a fairly complicated molecule. It's this it's a Franken protein. It's like FC region plus the synthetase warhead. And, they didn't know what or why they were making this. They figured out after the fact that it was, that it bound to one of these 4,000 proteins. But I must say, if you put a drug in an assay with 4,000 proteins, you're going to get a hit. And it's kind of like this really backwards logic of designing a drug. Usually you spend all your time thinking about like, okay, what do I want to do biologically? And then you say, okay, well, this is the target I want to attack, and you make a drug to that target. And that's pretty much how 99% of drug discovery works. They kind of did this in this like backward way, and then quote unquote discovered this, 𝗔𝗓𝗪𝗔, which had never before been really talked about as having anything to do with sarcoidosis. And again, this does not mean that, it's impossible that it has something to do with sarcoidosis, or that it's like the key thing that's been missing. It's possible, but it's very unlikely to find it by chance. And then if you look at what 𝗔𝗪𝗪 actually does, it's not a signaling molecule. And in fact, if you completely get rid of it in the body, there's not really any big changes. You don't have sarcoid, for example. So it's kind of weird that it would be, a drug target. What does it makes a difference? And so what it does is it binds, it sort of holds two molecules in place to get them to bind together. It holds, in one hand, it gets a molecule called semaphorin, and then the other hand, it binds VEGF. And, VEGF is a really important central actor and could be relevant in sarcoidosis, but, blocking or binding to, 𝗔𝗪𝗪, I can't see how that would help or like be an agonist. So it would have to be an antagonist. And so you'd have to show that stopping those two molecules from interacting would somehow be beneficial. And you'd also have to show that it does stop those two molecules from interacting. And I believe they're trying to say that it does not stop those two from acting, which to me begs the question, then why bind it at all? You can only do one of two things. You can activate a receptor, but this receptor has no intracellular signaling. It's just an extracellular receptor. It's kind of inert. It just acts as a co-receptor with those other two proteins. So I don't really understand what it is. And I will say, like, I'm humble enough after 25 years of looking at biotech, a lot of times the company has no clue how the drug works, but it still works. That has happened many times. And you have to be careful that, they just don't know, and that's okay. They're guessing, they're trying, they might figure it out 10 years from now. So you have to be a little humble and say, okay, what if? And the problem with the what if here is that the data is not good. If the data were good, you would see a dramatic drop in steroid use, and you would see improvement in lung function, dramatic improvement. That's not what we see in the trial results. The results are really modest. There's a no dose response, from 1 mg to 3 to 5. Those are not major dose differences. So there is a dose response, but I question why, for example, the 1 mg dose numerically is worse than placebo. And it seems to me that, like, unless they got the dose response perfect, the 5 mg per kg, which is a big dose for a protein, would not necessarily be like, that's active, but one doesn't work at all. Usually you get a little bit of activity, even at 1 or 3, and then the highest dose does really, really well. And I think there's a lot of like problems with the data. the whole like reducing steroids is very squirrely because it's like, well, most patients can reduce their steroids while they have sarcoidosis. So if you tell them to stop using their steroids, they will slowly go off of it. And, that makes, I think, running a trial like this really hard. And like, at the end of the day, patients, the disease is not just, okay, I have steroids. The disease is, I have a lung function problem. Because if you just have sarcoidosis and you have no symptoms, you don't need steroids. You only take the steroids where, you have a problem and you say, okay, I have a lung problem. I can't breathe that great. I need these steroids, and you take them and your breathing function comes back, hopefully. But then when you stop taking the steroids, a lot of patients can just stop and the disease self-resolves. So I don't know, this thing's like really kind of wild. And, I feel like if it was a miracle drug or a good drug even at all, you would have like 100% steroid-free patients in the drug arm and like 50% steroid-free in the placebo, which is what kind of the data has for placebo. But instead they had like 50 for drug, 48 for 1 mg, 40 or 53 for 3 mgs, and like 58 for 4 mgs. And like, that's all the same. That's all around 50%. That's not a drug. That's just common sense. A drug is when placebo is at 50% steroid reduction, 1 mg is like 60, 3 mgs is like 75, and 5 mgs is like 100% steroid reduction. And there are other drugs that do that for other diseases, of course. So to me, this is like the weakest drug you've ever seen, even if you could believe that high dose group, and it's a drug where you can't explain how it works. To me, that's always a recipe for disaster. So that's how I think about it.
So let me make sure I'm understanding you correctly in that last part. Did they have different amounts of steroid use for different patient groups? Is that normal or no?
Yeah, so the baseline, obviously each patient has a slightly different, they come into the trial on steroids. That is an inclusion criteria. They have to be on steroids actively right now to get into the trial. And everyone has a slightly different amount of steroids. I think it was 13 milligrams of prednisone on average. But, some patients were taking more, some patients were taking less. And, we feel like the 1 milligram and the placebo groups had sicker people than the 3 mgs and 5 mgs. And you can, I think, see that pretty obviously in the data. And as a result, the sicker patients get worse over time, and the healthier patients stay healthy. And this was not a trial that really was about their drug. This is a random trial of 10 people who have sarcoidosis and are sick, 10 other people who have sarcoidosis and are sick, 10 other people who have sarcoidosis and are not as sick, and then finally 10 more people who have sarcoidosis and are not as sick. And after the trial completed, we saw that the sick people got worse and the healthy people stayed comparatively healthy. And that doesn't tell you anything about the drug, unfortunately, because the baseline was too imbalanced to really read through anything. And the results were not, like I said, like some dramatic home run. They were, like I said, around 50, 48, 53, and 58, which is like all kind of in the same ballpark. That's not like you kind of need a microscope or magnifying glass to tell the difference. So I think that the patients, had their steroids reduced throughout the trial. It was a steroid taper. They had the doctors tell the patients to lower their steroids to, I think, 5 milligrams. And in fact, on the primary endpoint, the number of people who successfully tapered was the highest in placebo. They redefined that when they published their paper by saying, well, we can't show that would be bad. So they instead looked at the total steroid reduction, which is a second way of looking at it, and that's fine. But the way they thought about it before they did the trial was how many people reached the taper goal. And placebo actually had the most amount of taper successes, which is kind of like, that's really scary if you're investing in a drug. You don't want to see that. Any pharma that saw that would say, okay, back to the drawing board. We're not going to develop this anymore. So I think, it's a really hard thing to parse, and the simplest explanation is it just doesn't work. Like the amount of hoops mentally that you have to jump through to believe this drug works, it's just too many. Like it's just more obvious that this drug has no activity, which most small drug companies, they're swimming upstream. This is why I trust pharma a little bit more, because pharma has like 40 drugs and in the pipeline. And if one doesn't work, they can be honest about it and just say it didn't work. Why would we spend more money on this? We have 40 more drugs coming next year. While a company like aTyr or aTyr, they have one drug. So they have to put lipstick on the pig, as they say on Wall Street, and they have to dress it up and do something. Otherwise, why does the company exist? Why are they a publicly traded company? Why should their CEO be getting paid a lot? It's a lot easier to just do the phase 3 and say, well, we're a phase 3 trial company. And if you've ever gone to a compensation committee on a board of directors, I've had the privilege of being on a compensation committee. You hire these compensation consultants, and when it's time to determine your salary for the CEO and CFO, you look at comparable companies. And the comparable companies are other phase 3 biotechs. If you look at comparable companies of phase 1 biotechs or biotechs that have no drugs in the pipeline, the comparable salary estimate is much lower. So these CEOs are often incentivized when they have they have a drug that doesn't really work, to kind of get a little bit more aggressively develop drugs that maybe would be not so developed in other companies.